All right, guys, we're back and we're gonna try to do this here. Just had a little technicality issue with the technology going down on the stream here. Whoop, whoop. If you look at that dang lights right in my dang face, which is very, very unfortunate because this chair is incredibly comfortable. Anyway. So let's talk about Nick Caserio. That was the topic I was discussing earlier. So Nick Caserio is the GM. He's the GM now for the Houston Texans, and he came from the Patriots. And at John Carroll University is where he went to school. McDaniels went there, the OC of the Patriots, who was with the Denver Broncos with Bill Belichick for a long time. Jerry Schleplinski, the quarterback coach of the Patriots, also went to John Carroll University. There are several other guys that you can look up, like Greg Roman went to John Carroll. It's a whole grouping of people that were all together. They might have been roommates there, and that's how they got their connections into the NFL. It was from pretty much not Jerry Schleplinski, but it was from Nick Caserio. And the weird thing about the Houston Texans is that the owner of this team is a guy named Cal McNair. He has a really thick mustache, and he doesn't speak all that well and with that much conviction. And he gave Bill O'Brien like a complete control of the team, and then the team cratered away. Then they had Romeo Crennel, and then they tell Deshaun Watson that he would be interested in the process. Now, that was a mistake to tell a player on the team that he'd be involved in the process and then not even consult that player. That's definitely going to alienate the relationship completely. But a guy that you need to look up is this guy named Jack Easterby. And Jack Easterby is this character from South Carolina, born in Columbia, South Carolina, and this guy is almost like an evangelist kind of guy that like can go on TV and can preach to you the gospel. He'll like go around and he's like a traveling church kind of guy. And the thing is about Easterby is that he's a very engaging personality with a lot of players, and he's this character development guy. But a lot of times he is rumored to overstep his boundaries, and he uses sometimes his relationship with the Lord and other things to try to get into people's lives to sometimes advance himself up the profession. And he was a spiritual coach at South Carolina for I think their basketball team in 2008. And then he got in touch through his work at South Carolina. He then eventually found a home with the New England Patriots, and there he again did it. He really did a terrific job of utilizing his skills to move up the ladder. Now, I don't know if he did this in the most ethical way. I think that there are rumors about Jack Easterby that he might have used his relationship with the Lord to kind of advance himself throughout this process. He's a very controversial figure. A lot of guys think he's very, very phony. Some guys think that they're being followed away from the facility. When the Texans players go to the locker room, he always hands them different motivational cards. And a lot of people can think it's very corny or a little bit creepy, this guy Easterby. But to give Easterby some credit, he has taken himself, which is an individual with no football knowledge, and he's taken himself and made amazing connections with Bill Belichick, and now he's incredibly powerful. So he's gained a lot of tangible goals and a lot of tangible finance through his personality, which again might be completely unethical and borderline evil. Especially if you read the Sports Illustrated piece. It says in the Sports Illustrated piece, it paints him in, I would say, 75% a very negative light, that he kind of would take Christ and he would take his relationship with God, get really tight with these players just to advance himself. And there's multiple accounts in that Sports Illustrated article where there are people that are near the staff There's people in Houston, or there's people in New England that were like close to him, like equipment guys and guys that like weren't great players. But then when like Bill Belichick or some very famous good player would show up, that Easterby, the nice Easterby, would completely ditch them just to advance himself. So they call him like a Littlefinger character in Game of Thrones, that he's just using people, and he's kind of a BSer, and he's kind of full of crap. But it's incredibly an interesting story. It's probably going to be a 30 for 30. He sure seems like an evil, tyrannical character. Not one that is literally evil, not one that is physically hurting people, but one that is a BS artist that is kind of using his platform in very selfish ways. That's what it makes it seem like in the article. Now, I've never met Easterby. If I met him, I might again. It's kind of like hypnosis with Easterby, and he's probably part genius because he's able to get these guys to like buy into whatever stuff he's saying about them. It's almost like you know what it's almost like? It's almost like a little bit if you watch the Epstein documentary too. And again, people are going to say, now you're comparing Easterby to a guy that was a pedophile. But it's a rise to power is what I'm specifically talking about. How this guy Easterby, how he psychologically can mind F people to really believe in what he's talking about. So Easterby and now Nick Caserio, they're very tight with each other. Deshaun Watson doesn't like Easterby at all. There's also rumors that Jack Easterby, who's pretty much running the Houston Texans, how he wanted DeAndre Hopkins traded and he got his wish accomplished. So the thing is, if Houston's going to be successful under Caserio and Easterby, they're going to need to bring in guys that are fully on board with Jack Easterby. And I believe that Easterby, too, his relationship with Cal McNair is so tight that I don't think Easterby is going anywhere, because the reporters today were all asking Cal McNair, the owner, about Jack Easterby, and McNair wouldn't budge. So maybe Easterby has some dirt on Cal McNair. That very well could be possible. That's just speculation, but it's something that, again, is one of the more fascinating stories in all of sports to follow, is this Easterby character, and to read about him and to try to learn about him. And is it possible that maybe a couple of players or the people in that article were smearing Easterby? Absolutely, it's possible. It's also possible that the story is really true. So, but again, it's an incredible, it's a very interesting and polarizing character, certainly in the Houston Texans organization, that if I was just in a position of ownership, I would have definitely cleaned house on that. But again, it's Cal McNair running the show, and it seems like a dysfunctional show from the outside for sure. So talking about Easterby, talking about Jack Easterby, pretty interesting stuff there with the Houston Texans. You go into Deshaun Watson, and this is a guy that might be an Archie Manning, meaning that he might have a really good team, but is he going to be the guy that's going to be able to lead this team into the promised land of winning playoffs? And if I was the Houston Texans, I would maybe be interested in getting Joe Brady and trading Deshaun Watson to the Miami Dolphins if Zach Wilson was available, because Zach Wilson and Joe Brady, Zach Wilson in his phone call the other day with the BYU people on the BYU radio network on YouTube, Zach Wilson said that he wanted to play for either Kyle Shanahan of the 49ers or Joe Brady, wherever Joe Brady would go, which was Carolina at the time. So it's very interesting. And then if you read the lines of Houston and their religious kind of attitudes and their selfless attitudes, I really think Deshaun Watson is kind of irritated in Cleveland or in Houston. And there is a chance that Zach Wilson would fit the culture better. Trevor Lawrence might fit there. Ironically, Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson, they're both from Clemson. They both have the same quarterback coach. They probably have the same agent. So again, if that were to happen, that would just be absolutely absurd. But do I think Watson could be traded? Possibly. And he definitely maybe could go to the New England Patriots, where, again, Caserio came from. Now, Easterby is tight with Bill Belichick, so maybe Deshaun wants to get out of there. You look at Joe Judge and Jerry Schleplinski. So it's very interesting, looking at this Patriots staff and how really they sprinkle around the NFL and where they land at different areas. Belichick kind of, his fingerprints are all over the NFL indeed. So that's the story out in Houston, is that basically, the owner McNair decided to keep the controversial figure Easterby, decided to hire Nick Caserio. Easterby and Caserio were tight in New England. That's the path that they're going on now, the Houston Texans. And curious to see how this Texans team will progress going forward. And Nick Caserio, how he is at evaluating talent, and what head coach is going to want to go into that mix in Houston. We already had Matt Eberflus reject going to the Houston Texans for an interview. Joe Brady happened to do a really good job there. Joe Brady seems to be a guy that is in the football into the X's and O's, but does he understand the character? Is he going to understand the dynamics of the Houston Texans? Because that just seems like a job, honestly, that I would not be interested in, because it just seems a little too controversial for my liking and a little too strange right now in Houston, putting it frankly. So, and again, maybe that's from the media. So, but again, that's all we know is what we can possibly hear. Maybe you go down there, you investigate, you see it for yourself. But this story is fascinating about Easterby and the Houston Texans organization. Let's go into a little college football talk now. Shane Beamer, the head coach of South Carolina, he ended up hiring Mike Bobo, and Mike Bobo was a coach that had pretty good running game with Kevin Harris. You had Luke Doty, who played quarterback a little bit, Colin Hill. Shi Smith is headed to the NFL. There's not much talent there on the outside. The tight end is a pretty good player. He's like a coach's son. I unfortunately forget the name, but very likable kind of player who's a tight end for South Carolina. And the point is basically with the Houston Texans, with South Carolina, they had a good running game with Mike Bobo, but then Bobo was, completely ditched Shane Beamer, said he would stay, and then bolted for Auburn 2 months later. So, one, it definitely reflects poor a little bit on the character of Mike Bobo, admitting that he would have stayed in South Carolina because he didn't fulfill his duties and he wasn't all in with Shane Beamer because he got hired in the same capacity to another location. Now, you could say that Auburn's a better job and maybe the pay raise is going to be significantly higher at the University of Auburn. That definitely could be true. It could be up from, just guessing here, maybe like a $700,000 difference in salary for Mike Bobo. Because, put it this way, the coordinator of LSU, Marcus Freeman, the defensive coordinator there, he might be making $2 million at LSU, and at Cincinnati, he was making $600,000. And Shane Beamer makes $2.75 million as the head coach of South Carolina. The D coordinator of LSU makes almost just as much money as Shane Beamer does as a head coach in the SEC. So again, you have Justin Stepp there, and Justin Stepp is a really good wide receivers coach. That's a great get because you look at how good Arkansas's receivers are, and the thing is about the Arkansas receiver group. The thing is about the Arkansas receiver group is that you had Treylon Burks, who was an unbelievable receiver last year. he could be a first-round pick in 2 years. So the development at the receiver position is absolutely absurd. You had Woods, who was a really good receiver at Arkansas. Great passing game with Felipe Franks, explosive level passing game, and Treylon Burks is absolutely fantastic. Also, you look at Trey Knox, who is a really good receiver. The recruiting there at wide receiver has been absolutely fantastic. Justin Stepp's a local to South Carolina. I think he's from Columbia himself. So Shane Beamer was able to get him to mobilize and come back home to South Carolina from Arkansas. It was a huge pull for Shane Beamer getting Justin Stepp, in there as well. And then you look at the special teams coordinator, is a guy from Memphis that I really like. He has a ton of experience, very well respected. He's a special teams and associate head coach. I think it's like Paul, I forget his name, but he's from Memphis. He was the Memphis special teams coach. He's excellent, guys. He's going to be really good. In terms of the offensive line, Wolf Friend leaves. So then they bring in this guy, Satterfield. And this guy, Satterfield's from the Carolina Panthers. He was at Baylor under Matt Rule's staff. Kind of runs a run-heavy offense. Had a terrible head coaching record of 3-17. Got fired after 1.5 years at Tennessee Tech. But the guy Satterfield, it's not Scott Satterfield, it's like Mark Satterfield, same last name, ironically, as Scott Satterfield of Louisville. The thing is about this offensive coordinator is that this guy did develop good quarterback play. He does know Matt Rule. He can run the football a little bit. He's in Carolina, so he knows the landscape of the states of Carolina. It's an interesting hire. The guy has NFL experience. I think he's even more fun than Mike Bobo. Now, Mike Bobo's a more sure thing given his experience at Georgia and given his experience as a head coach at Colorado State. Mike Bobo was a sure thing. But Mike Bobo Mike Bobo is just trying to continue to mobilize, and he's not, put it this way, Mike Bobo was kind of a snake, and Mike Bobo was not really interested in South Carolina at all. It's a little disappointing for Beamer to kind of get completely duped and be that gullible in the first place to end up hiring Mike Bobo. Now you could say that if Bobo never got the Auburn job, he wouldn't have left, and coaches leave all the time. But again, South Carolina and Auburn, if you're South Carolina, Auburn's your competitor, and your guy just left for a competitor. It's not like Mike Bobo left to go be the head coach at the Auburn University. It's not like that happened at all. Or it's not like Brian Harsin and Mike Bobo are unbelievable friends. So you have Wolf Friend too, that just both of these guys bullied young Shane Beamer. And very uncomfortable, but probably a good learning lesson for Shane early into his tenure. I'm really rooting for Shane Beamer. Think he's a great guy. Think he's about the right stuff at South Carolina. He's building a really fun staff. He's going to, hire the Florida defensive backs coach next. And for defensive coordinator, he was looking at Arnett from Mississippi State. That seems to be losing traction. But I believe that he might look at Chad Staggs from Coastal Carolina, which will be an absolutely tremendous hire. He's also looking at Brent Key from Penn State. Other news in college football is that we have Mike Yurachek, who was the passing game coordinator at Texas, and who was the architect of Mike Gundy through the early 2000s, from like 2010 to 2018. Mike Yurachek was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach under Mike Gundy. They ran a beautiful air raid attack. I mean, you go back to J.W. Walsh and Clint Chelf, and I don't know if Justin Blackman was there, if Brandon Whedon, but you've seen absolutely exceptional quarterbacks come out of Oklahoma State during that time period. Trying to go back and think of the other wide receivers that you had at Oklahoma State during that time. It's a little bit disappointing that I can't, think of more names off of, top of my head. But it's going to be like a very spread out attack in the Big Ten. They're not going to run the ball. It's very pass oriented. And Kirk Ciarrocca was a guy at Minnesota that took the job at Penn State because he's a Penn State guy. Him and Fleck and Franklin are friends. However, Kirk Ciarrocca worked with PJ for about 10 years, from Western Michigan up to Minnesota. They just won the Outback Bowl together. They beat Penn State actually that year, went 10-2 for the first time in 50 years. And then he was the hot name, and then he decided to go up to Penn State, and then he got burned after 1 year during a COVID year with a crappy quarterback, bad receivers, starting running back goes out. Absolutely ridiculous circumstances and a sad firing for Kirk Ciarrocca. Now, the one thing about Ciarrocca is that I like his offenses a little bit in terms of running the football. He's very good, but in terms of explosive plays, he's not as exciting as Yurachek. But I'm not that excited for Mike Yurachek that much. Kirk Ciarrocca at Minnesota, I really want to see him go back to Minnesota, help out with that staff. He plays a very ball control style, and James Franklin probably wants more points. So I think the Yurachek hire is okay. It's a little bit of a retread hire. But again, James Franklin at Penn State too. It's getting a little weird up there in Penn State with Franklin. You know, he had some success early. There were questions. Early, and then he won the Big Ten championship and hit that magical run with Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley. And then the following years still had success as well, but wasn't able to defeat Ohio State in the following year. So, you know, a decent 9-3, 10-2 coach James Franklin is, but has never been to the playoffs or anything of that nature at Penn State. He's a good coach, not a great coach. Let's talk about some unbelievable moves in college football, and this includes Coach Ed Orgeron. Ed Orgeron is on fire this offseason. I mean, Ed Orgeron's the guy who hired Joe Brady, and now he goes back to the Joe Brady well. He hires in Will Mangum from the Carolina Panthers as his quarterback coach, and he also is bringing in Jake Peetz. It reminds me of that pitcher of the San Diego Padres, Jake Peavy. Used to be an excellent pitcher in Major League Baseball, but Jake Peetz, Peetz, is now going to be he's going to be now the offensive coordinator for LSU. And you look at Jake Peetz, and I think that this is a very exciting hire. The guy was with Joe Brady at LSU. The guy was with the Carolina Panthers. This guy, Jake Peetz, could absolutely be a game changer. He's a young, exciting offensive coordinator for LSU. They're promoting some guys within the organization to help out there at the organization. So between Mangum and Peetz, this is going to be a really fun LSU team to monitor. And between Finley and Max Johnson, I think Max Johnson has kind of a weak arm a little bit. I mean, you do have Terrace Marshall. You have some talented receivers there. The running backs are coming along too, but the point is that if I'm LSU, I'm looking at getting a transfer quarterback. Like Hendon Hooker would have been good. He went to Tennessee, but I would look at the transfer market because, again, I'm not sure any of these quarterbacks that are at LSU are the future. I think Finley's a little bit too slow, and I think Max Johnson doesn't have a big enough arm to really be an elite level quarterback. Although Johnson played well towards the back half of the year, and Finley has a high upside because of his ability to throw the football. He's really talented, and he has elite arm strength, elite velocity. It's just that in the pocket, he is a clear pocket passer at 6'6". He's a big quarterback. So, but that's the thing. He's kind of very slow and immobile. TJ Finley. So it's going to be interesting what they do at the quarterback position. But again, it was a disaster with Scott Linehan, a disaster with Bo Pelini. He tried to give Pelini a chance after Youngstown. Pelini wasn't able to adapt quickly to the SEC. Missouri put up huge points on LSU. Now, LSU had a lot of opt-outs, but still, the defense was way too inconsistent. I mean, even Ole Miss just toyed with LSU offensively. Lane Kiffin dominated him. Eli Drinkowitz did. Mike Leach in game one. It was an absolutely disgraceful defense at LSU with Bo Pelini. So Ed Orgeron doing an unbelievable job. He ends up lining up, firing Ed Orgeron and firing Scott Linehan, who was a bad offensive coordinator with the Cowboys. So Orgeron realized his mistakes and would not put up with BS and not hang on to a lame duck hire for more than a year. And it shows great decisiveness from Coach Ed Orgeron. And now they're going to go after Marcus Freeman, who's the next superstar in college football coaching. This guy helped Cincinnati's defense be elite. He's an Ohio State linebacker himself, Freeman. And this guy, Marcus Freeman, even played in the NFL, but he's 31 years old. He has a great leadership about him. He has a great way of connecting to his players, and Cincinnati's defense was absolutely like the best defense in football. So you combine, so now Luke Fickell loses an absolutely vital part of his staff, Marcus Freeman. And again, Freeman's going from making $600,000, now he's making $2 million at LSU. And again, he gets to coach like some of the best cornerbacks really in the world. I mean, Derek Stingley is going to be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. He is an unbelievable player. He might even be the best player in college football, Derek Stingley on defense, number 24. So LSU has absolutely elite level cornerbacks there. You look at Jamal Adams going to the NFL. Jacoby Stevens is going to be going to the NFL. Jalen Mills is already in the NFL. Honey Badger was an LSU defensive back. Patrick Peterson. So just look at Mo Claiborne. So just look at all of the LSU defensive backs, right? Chason, Devin White, incredible talent, over at LSU. The defensive lines and everything. LSU is just stacked on defense with Dave Aranda. They put out unbelievable talent, physicality, and it's an awesome job for Marcus Freeman going there with Coach Ed Orgeron. So congrats to Marcus on landing the new job out in the Bayou, out in LSU. So anyway, we're now 28 minutes into the podcast. Talking about some big-time college movement. Auburn, like I said, hiring Derek Mason, kind of a big move. Sarkisian's building a nice staff. Auburn's kind of going with Derek Mason, Mike Bobo, some retread SEC hires for Harsin that is kind of looking to gain his footing a little bit in the SEC, where I think that Shane Beamer is even more prepared actually than Brian Harsin. But again, some crazy news. I wonder where Kirk Ciarrocca is going to end up as he leaves Penn State. But Nick Caserio today had a decent, first impression today. The ownership, McNair, seemed a little bit over his head as an owner, just coming off it from a public speaking standpoint. And we will see how McNair in Houston goes from here with the head coaching search. You look at Deshaun Watson, he has a no-trade clause on his contract. He's probably making about $37 million a year, a pretty crazy amount of money to trade for. There are certain teams like the Patriots, the Giants, the Dolphins that could really be interested in Watson. Even the New York Jets, who have the number 2 overall pick. If Joe Brady goes to Houston, you put Brady with Wilson. Then things could get incredibly interesting with Zach Wilson and that as we go forward in this evaluating process. Let's get into the fun stuff, which is the NFL playoffs. And the playoffs pretty much are beginning tomorrow. So I'll go through my picks really quickly. I like the Bills to rock the Indianapolis Colts. I like the Bills to win that game. Probably 38 to 20. I think that they can get after Phillip Rivers. Their offense is too explosive. I think it's great that they're playing at 1 o'clock. Get the game over with. Get in, get out, do the job, win the game. Okay? So I'm excited for the Bills to move on quickly. I don't want that game to be very dramatic. I want the Bills to validate their season quickly dispatched the Colts, kind of like the Niners did with the Vikings a few years ago in the early game, kind of like Kansas City did with the Indianapolis Colts a little bit a couple of years ago in the divisional round. Get your work in, get it over with, and move on quickly. Then we have Seattle and the Rams. This game will be boring. We've seen this game a million times. The Seahawks will win a close game. They always play close together. You might even see a missed field goal at the end of the game. This game is really boring. Would not really watch it one bit because the Rams offense is not going anywhere. And Seattle's a fun team, but not at home. This game almost means nothing yet because if Seattle wins, the next game will be really good. But this game to me is a little dry. This is my least favorite game because I've just seen this game too many times. Then a game of a little intrigue is a new playoff team, DC, playing against the Tampa Bay football team. And in this football matchup, I'm going to take the Tampa Bay football team to beat DC in this game. You look at Alex Smith. His leg is injured. And it's going to be Taylor Heineke from Old Dominion that played a little bit. Where did Taylor play? Oh, yeah, at the Carolina Panthers with Will Grier a little bit. He beat out Will Grier. He's about 6'1", doesn't have a big arm whatsoever, but can be accurate short term. But I just look at this Bucs offense, and Tom Brady is just hitting on all cylinders right now. And the offense that their opponent's going to be playing with is absolutely going to be downright disgustingly horrible to watch. Alex Smith, it's not his fault. I commend Alex. He's the player of the year, comeback player of the year. He's a phenomenal person and done a phenomenal job getting himself back in the game shape. Alex Smith's leg is all messed up, and his other leg is his calf on his leg that isn't even almost broken is messed up. So both of his legs are done. And you saw the Eagles were almost trying to tank against that team, and DC couldn't even take advantage of the Eagles when the Eagles were trying to lay down. So I think the Bucs roll in this game. Bucs get up early, and Bucs can go on to an unemotional win and quickly dispatch of this whole horrible NFC East season. I'm ready to just move on and not even discuss the 2020 NFC East because it was just futility all around for the 2020 NFC East. Then let's look at the game on Sunday at 1 o'clock Sunday. Best game of the week. You have Lamar Jackson, the Ravens, a team that's lost twice to the Tennessee Titans. Is it going to be Lamar Jackson's time to win a playoff game? He's 0-2 in the playoffs. The Chargers, the first year, he did a great job of getting the Ravens into a position to win the playoff game. And then Lamar Jackson was very bad for the first 3 quarters. He didn't play his best football. And then at the end of the game, he tried to make a late rally, but it was too late. And Phillip Rivers and Anthony Lynn won Coach of the Year that year. Anthony Lynn was able to defeat Lamar Jackson Sunday at 1 o'clock. And I believe that was before the Eagles played Matt Nagy, who won Coach of the Year. And Anthony Lynn was the runner-up Coach of the Year. That was before the Cody Parkey game where he missed a field goal off of the upright, and Nick Foles was in that game, and Chicago couldn't beat the Minnesota Vikings, or Chicago beat the Minnesota Vikings to play that game against the Eagles when they could have let Minnesota in, and the Eagles wouldn't have had any playoffs as a wild card that year. So basically, Lamar Jackson, too, against Tennessee last year, he struggled in the first 2 quarters for 3 quarters. He had some drops. Mark Ingram was not playing, but the Tennessee Titans, they did a great job of hitting explosive plays. I mean, Rainey hit that 50-yard touchdown. Ryan Tannehill played a very efficient game. Jonnu Smith had an unbelievable catch in the end zone. Derrick Henry had one of the greatest games from a running back in playoff history. Is that all going to happen again? I'm actually going to take Baltimore in this game. I guess it's not an upset because the Ravens are favorites. So I'm going to take Baltimore. Baltimore's too red hot. The Titans' defense is their secondary is not good enough. Their linebackers are not great, and Baltimore's a team on a mission right now. So Baltimore's going to go in there and they're going to win this game. So Baltimore's going to win. Then, here's the game, all right? Then. 4 o'clock, Mitchell Trubisky against the New Orleans Saints. So is Mitchell Trubisky going to be allowed to throw the ball against New Orleans defense? Because New Orleans has a good running defense. It's up to Mitchell Trubisky. This is a game for his future, not only in Chicago, but in the NFL. Could Mitchell Trubisky have a legendary day, or could he not? I'm going to say this game's going to be really close. But again, I'm going to try to pick the winners here. I'm going to take the Saints in a close game. But I think Trubisky plays very well, actually, in this game. Just quarterbacks going to the Dome like Nick Foles, Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford in the playoffs. When has the Dome really gotten a quarterback, and when has a quarterback played really bad in the Dome? Usually it's the Saints offense that's dealing in the Dome, and the other quarterback, usually it's a shootout. So I think it could happen again, but the Bears defense isn't good enough to beat the New Orleans Saints this year. The Bears defense is very overrated. They have Eddie Jackson and Khalil Mack, but from a holistic standpoint, they're not that good of a defense. Then you go on to the game at night, which is Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And I think that Cleveland, in this spot, Baker's just going to be sacked a little bit too much. He's not going to have enough offense to win the game late. I think the Steelers get ahead a little bit. And it's a low-scoring game, like 20 to 13. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to beat the Cleveland Browns because the Browns don't really have coaches. They're missing some players on their offensive line. So the Steelers are going to win. And the Steelers winning is a blessing for Buffalo. So Buffalo gets to play the Steelers, which will be fantastic for the Bills because the Bills will then get a great chance. I believe the Bills will then go to the AFC Championship. And then it'll be Lamar versus Kansas City. And that game could be an absolute toss-up in the AFC. In the NFC, then, what you're going to see happen is you're going to see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're going to play the New Orleans Saints in a rematch. That's going to be a really fun game. And then you are going to see... Well, actually, no, actually. You're going to see the Seattle Seahawks are going to play the New Orleans Saints, and the Packers are going to play the Bucs. And that's going to be really fun. And I actually think then you could see Seattle win. And you're most likely going to see Green Bay probably beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Lambeau Field. But that's going to be incredibly close. So then you're probably going to have Seattle's road here. You're going to then have Seattle going up against like Green Bay for a chance to go to the Super Bowl. Green Bay probably wins that. And then you're going to have Buffalo in the AFC Championship. And if it's Buffalo versus the Ravens, I think the Bills will get to the title game. If it's Buffalo going to Kansas City, then the Chiefs will probably end up going to the title game. And then you might just have, in a very boring way, you might have Packers and Chiefs. But the best Super Bowl would probably be Bucks and Bills, or the best Super Bowl would be Packers and Bills. I want the Bills to make the Super Bowl. I do. They deserve it this year. They're the team of destiny. They're having the magic season. It's like Joe Burrow at LSU. Everything's clicked with Stephon Diggs getting there. The new pieces of Gabriel Davis, Cole Beasley, Brian Dable. This offense is great. McDermott and this defense has really turned it around. The second half of the year, they're starting to play Bills defense like McDermott and Leslie Frazier are used to. So it's going to be a really great playoffs, though. Overall, we're going to have some really compelling matchups. This week, we have the Ravens game tomorrow, which is compelling. The Steelers-Browns is compelling. The Bills and the Bucks games are pretty good. Then the games, then the Bears game will be good, and the Seahawks game will be just bad, not very good. But that's honestly how I view the playoffs happening. Saturday might be a complete dud. Saturday might be a lot of blowouts. Sunday itself, I think Sunday's going to get very interesting for the majority of the day. That's how I would predict it to go. A lot of bloodbaths on Saturday, and then some very compelling games on Sunday. Very compelling games on Sunday. Very interesting outcomes on Sunday. So we hit 40 minutes of college football talk, 40 minutes on the Houston Texans, Nick Caserio, all of that entails. I appreciate everybody coming out to watch this video and going to go post it now on YouTube. Alrighty, guys. Thanks. Take care.